you've said it, but I think it's really key to understand. We went from 1,500 APIs to how many API endpoints with GraphQL?
One.
All right. Okay. That's how simple. So now with that one endpoint, maybe you just have a use case where someone's like, I need a duty rate with this HS code, like the percentage, right? Not just the calculation. Maybe they want the percentage, or maybe they want the chapter heading to the HS code, or maybe they want to pull in a party or something else into that, and that is all just available inside the graph. Welcome to the Decoding Cross-Border E-commerce podcast. And today we have a special guest. So first off, myself, Clint Reed, here with my co-host, Aaron Bezant. And we brought in Andrew Spencer, the CTO at Zonos. How are you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing well. I got to say, I'm a huge fan of the podcast.
Yeah, we've heard, all the comments you've been making around the podcast. So you were so excited about the podcast that you've been scheming up a joke, which we said we didn't want to hear because we wanted to be surprised. So yeah, what do you have for us today?
That's right. So this is very apropos for today. Why did the GraphQL developer buy a ladder?
I have no idea.
Because he found his queries were getting too deep.
Okay, for all those that don't understand GraphQL, you'll get the joke at the end of the podcast.
That's right. I did have a question though. Now that we brought Andrew in here, if we took your IQ and my IQ and added them together, would it equal Andrew's IQ?
No.
Okay, it would far trust me, it would far surpass my IQ. But that helps keep me humble.
Yes.
Knowing that I'm superseded often at Zonos. You never want to be the smartest person in the room, right?
I don't know. Andrew's up there. So this is an exciting podcast for me.
Podcast about APIs, right? We're going to talk about cross-border APIs. Not everybody understands what GraphQL is yet. You will. But today, in general, we're going to talk about APIs and cross-border.
Let's talk about Andrew first.
Let's do it.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Andrew.
Well, I was born as a wee lad, Green Hills, and what would you like to know about me?
Tell us about your history, right? So you have e-commerce background. So would specifically, I think, tell us about your career as a leader in technology, right? But also, I think it's very industry specific and how you landed at Zonos.
Yeah. So I have been doing e-commerce for a long time. And I remember when Amazon launched. And I was really into books, loved books. And I worked for a local bookstore called Deseret Book. And we had a goal and this was way back in 1998, I believe, to become like Amazon, and had that aspiration. And I had some great mentors at Deseret Book that kind of showed me the ropes, introduced me to how to build a scalable system. And I think we accomplished that at Deseret Book, where we created a system that rivaled Amazon.com. And that was a great learning experience. And I stayed in e-com for quite a bit. And
wait. Okay, rivals Amazon.com. The technology, but apparently some marketing must have failed there or something, right? In the ambition.
Well, so I would say it exceeded Amazon actually in a lot of ways, because we had a multi-channel business where we had the catalog business. I don't know if you remember, but you could get this catalog in the mail, and we would manage those orders via the same back office system. And then we had the web-based DeseretBook.com channel as well. And Amazon didn't have like a catalog back in those days. And so we were managing, I think, more complexity and growing it, but it's a niche market. So this is a niche bookseller. And the intention was never to grow it to become an Amazon, like selling every type of book. It was focused on that niche. But I think in that niche, we created something. The site before we started working on it was extremely limited. And the technology that we built, honestly, I think was as good as what Amazon had at the time. In fact, I was at AWS recently, and we were talking about the original architecture of Amazon.com. And it brought back so many memories because I was like, man, they were just fumbling through this like all of us were back in, 1997, 1998. And, I don't think their architecture was any better than what we had built.
So that was the start of the e-commerce journey for you, 1998, 25 years later, right? So what else happened between then and now for you?
Yeah, so I always loved technology and was programming from a very young age and stayed in e-com for a while. But I started a company that was doing more education-based initiatives, and that was a lot of fun. So I built a learning management system that then grew legs and grew into it was one of the first systems to do electronic time cards on a BlackBerry. So I wrote an application that allowed retail sales associates to log their time in a BlackBerry. And that got me really into mobile technology. So then I started diving into mobile technology and consulting with a lot of startups, started a company doing fractional CTO work. And that's kind of how I got introduced to Zonos. So doing fractional CTO work, I would help build teams to scale startups. And I'd talk with various people and started learning about Zonos. So a friend of mine was working at Zonos. And this was actually, I was working on some GraphQL projects. And we're going to talk about GraphQL a little bit more in this podcast. But, I asked a friend of mine, hey, have you done anything with GraphQL? And he's like, no, I'm currently working at Zonos. We're doing REST APIs. He said, hey, you should talk with Clint. And I was like, I was really happy with what I was doing. And I said, nah, I'm good. But, thanks. It's interesting what your company's doing. And then he was just super persistent. Like, if you know this individual, he can be very persistent, which is a good trait. And so it was just like, maybe like every week, it's like, hey, you really should like come to Zonos and talk with Clint. And so I finally gave in, and I came down to St. George and met Clint, and it was pretty interesting talking with Clint. And I could see there's something unique happening at Zonos, something special. And so I got interested and talked with some more team members, and here we are. I decided to make the jump and move down to St. George, and it's been one of the best decisions of my life. I think Zonos is a very unique company. I've been at a lot of successful startups, and Zonos has all of those ingredients and more. I think Zonos has more potential than any company I've seen.
Well, we should end. Oh, okay, no, that's great. Humble Andrew, not a surprise, right? I think you missed some key points about your history, right? I mean, you have massive experience in with some big brands, right? I mean, you've been at Stance, you've been at backcountry.com, and I think a lot of that is translated as you came over to Zonos, because we're really enabling cross-border e-commerce specifically, and so that context I think that you brought with you probably helped out a lot as we were, trying to figure out where we're going next, because the history of Zonos, right, like 14 years ago, or back in 2009 when I started the company, was I had my next door neighbor build a hosted checkout to help take orders and for cross border, and over time that translated into, okay, we're going to become a carrier agnostic product, we're going to become a technology product and API first company, but with that we had a lot of legacy tech debt. So what did did it feel that way to you, or did you did we feel totally modernized when you arrived, Andrew?
No, and I was warned. When I spoke with folks at Zonos, that was one of the things that I was warned of. It's like, hey, we've got some technical debt, but things that I'd worked on in the past, I've dealt with that quite a bit, and so that didn't deter me. And every company accrues technical debt. That's just the nature of the business, and so. Did Zonos have more technical debt perhaps than other companies I'd worked at? Yeah, for sure. However, it wasn't insurmountable. And there's the reason you accumulate technical debt is because you found product market fit. Like you're moving quickly, you're solving problems that customers have, and you need to move quickly to do that. And so I think Zonos did things the right way. It's important to remember that Zonos bootstrapped to profitability. And so there was no, like, Clint, you didn't have an option to have, 10 engineers, 10 seasoned senior engineers developing the product for you. You were scrappy. And I think the team did a great job given the constraints that you had. You're bootstrapping to profitability. And so, but there was opportunity, and that's what I saw. There was this opportunity that, hey, if we modernize this stack, sky's the limit.
Okay, so we decided to modernize the stack. You come on, we knew this needed to happen. We need to get rid of the old JSPs I'd written, or whatever,
Right.
The billing system. And we all sat around a room. Aaron was in here, and we spent so much time in API design, in the variable name decisions. The countless hours. And if you accumulated the hours and the number of people in the room, I mean, thousands and thousands of hours, probably. Yeah, easy.
Yeah, because it was like a 3 to 6 month project.
Crazy. We went through everything. And we're running into some challenges because at the time we were on REST. And we'll want to talk a little about APIs and have you explain in a minute. But at the time we're using REST APIs, and we had a lot of them. And we were trying to make we were redesigning these as REST APIs. And then GraphQL came into the discussion, which actually ended up suiting our needs really, really well. So maybe talk a little bit about the difference between REST and GraphQL, and also for Zonos, and like how we arrived at where we're at today, and with that decision to move to GraphQL.
Yeah, so one of the key differences between REST and GraphQL is that with GraphQL, you can specifically fetch the information that you need exactly for the use case or business case. And graphs are a really good way to model a business domain, because that's how we think about things in the real world. So you think about objects and the connection that these objects have to each other. And in a REST API, it's a little different. You have what are called resources, and the connections aren't necessarily clear. You have to be very, very explicit on, what those connections are. And a true REST API would be using what's called hypermedia, which would better link things together and create a little more discoverability. But nobody uses, I have never, I don't think, used an API that had hypermedia implemented correctly. And because of that, so you could take the Stripe example. We use Stripe APIs a ton. And they do something that's called object expansion, which kind of leads to some of the benefit you can get from GraphQL APIs. But that is something specific that Stripe has created to solve the problems that they have. And the GraphQL APIs can be a lot more flexible, because you can, the object expansion is really inherent in these nodes and these edges or these connections that you have among the nodes. And so as we were sitting down, and I was just drinking from a fire hose at this point. It was crazy, because we tell everyone this: cross-border logistics is extremely complex, and we're trying to solve that complexity. And so it's a pretty high bar for us to take this complex domain and what we call decode it. And so I was not very familiar with any of this terminology. So I'm being introduced to like DDP, DDU, HS codes, and all of this stuff, and trying to think through this. And we're in these sessions and designing these APIs. And it was clear that there was a better way to model the business domain, and that it would be through a graph. And then at that point, I think it was clear we needed to move to GraphQL, not just to better model our business domain, but there would be a lot of benefits for our customers as well.
I think specifically we were, we would start off and we go through the flow of an order, right? You need to classify, get an item, right? Make sure what the classification is. And then now that you have the classification, okay, now let's get now we're in the checkout. We have the items, we classify it. We're going to run to get a shipping quote. We're going to get the shipping quote. We need duty and tax rate back. The order may or may not complete. There's going to be payment attempts, and then the order is going to finally complete. I think the challenge we were running into was we had a Shopify app that was using REST, and we had just done a new REST API, and it was awesome. Okay, and it is awesome, and it is used by a lot of customers where you can call for the landed cost and get a landed cost back, and duties and taxes, all of that's in there. But the challenge we were running into is we're like, well, we need shipment rating too, and we had a shipment rating API as well, and we were struggling to get these two to work in tandem together really, really well. And we were not able to, so we had just redone our REST APIs. We're API first. Hey, we have customers using this REST API, and then we're going through a workflow in Shopify that we couldn't get. I mean, we could have. It would have been messy. So what does GraphQL afford that REST couldn't do in that example, right?
That's a great question. So we have, I should say, over 1,500 REST APIs. And yet we had this use case, this workflow that we couldn't really get done in a clean fashion with those 1,500 endpoints. And part of the reason is those endpoints weren't originally designed to interoperate. And so as we were designing these new APIs, essentially what we're doing, at first maybe unknowingly, is designing a GraphQL schema.
Yep.
And so a GraphQL schema is creating those links among all of these nodes. So you have the shipment rating, and you have the landed costs, and you have the order, and you have the classification and the catalog. Those were pretty disparate and not even like loosely coupled in the older systems. And what we did through the GraphQL schema is link everything together. And that allows us now, we can create workflows where, do you want a full landed cost workflow with shipment rating? No problem. Do you just want a landed cost and provide us with a shipment rating? Going back to us being carrier agnostic, right? Do you want, for example, in supply chain, there's no order. So when grandma goes to USPS with a package that she wants to ship to her grandson that's living abroad, there's no order there. It's just a package. And that package doesn't need an order. It probably needs HS codes now, especially if it's going into Europe, for example. And it probably needs to have anything in there cataloged and restricted if need be. And then it needs a landed cost. So these workflows are different depending on the verticals that that our merchants and customers are using.
I'm the non-technical one in the room here. So, but as I've kind of watched this journey, my view of it, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is if I go back to a legacy API, one we've had, for years and years and years, it did a lot. It did a whole lot. It did a number of things from rating and landed costs and a whole bunch of other things. There's a whole kitchen sink thrown in there. But then you start running into some performance issues as well when you're doing it that way. Then we started breaking out REST APIs that were compartmentalized to handle specific use cases. Okay, this is just going to do landed cost, and it's going to be amazing landed cost API, REST API. But that's all it does is landed cost. And then we had some amazing rating APIs that can do rating and restrictions and, denied party screening, all of these things that now are compartmentalized, but then you have to tie them all together, right? Individually and standalone for their specific use were amazing, but you need to tie them all together at times into a unified transaction. Am I understanding that right? And that's where GraphQL came in to kind of be that glue to put everything together?
Yeah, it served as kind of a forcing function for us to work backwards. And so we decided that we would be API first. And that was key because then we understood which relations we needed to model. And then it was clear that GraphQL was the best way to model those relations. And that schema served as a forcing function to ensure that we had the consistency, the interoperability, et cetera. We have REST APIs that are super capable, But we do hit performance issues sometimes with those because what we can do with GraphQL is we're doing something that's called a federated supergraph. And so we can publish this supergraph that our customers can use. And because it's federated, there are certain things that we can do in parallel. And so, for example, in the REST case, let's just use Stripe as an example again. So let's say that, and we've run into this before, we're getting we have a payment intent and we need additional data to properly create a payout or a refund off of that payment intent. Well, the payment intent doesn't have that, first of all. And second of all, you can't even expand that data. So you have to start diving in through the Stripe APIs to get the data. And we're making multiple calls back and forth. So it's really inefficient. Whereas with Zonos and our GraphQL APIs, you can just ask for all that information in one request. And so there's just one round trip. And then we can federate that out to all of our microservices. And there are certain things that we can definitely parallelize in that request. And that speeds things significantly. So we have the scalability that's inherent.
So
you go from
just to clarify. So federate is kind of a divide and conquer of the work, and you can do a number of things in parallel, which allows you to get a much better performance. Right.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. Go ahead.
Well, and I think you've said it, but I think it's really key to understand. We went from 1,500 APIs to how many API endpoints with GraphQL?
One.
All right. Okay. That's how simple. So now with that one endpoint, maybe you just have a use case where someone's like, I need a duty rate with this HS code, like the percentage, right? Not just the calculation. Maybe they want the percentage, or maybe they want the chapter heading to the HS code, or maybe they want to pull in a party or something else into that, and that is all just available inside the graph. And that's what it is, I think, is afforded is one, like you said, it served as a forcing function to have everything connect versus with Stripe, which has been, and it has amazing API. I mean, the amount of time we spent in our session of what does Stripe do and why would we do it different? That was always the question, right? Like we can do it different, but you better have a good reason why. GraphQL did afford something different. Like you said, with the payment intents, if it's not expandable in that object, now you're having to talk to another API to pull in that information, and you're more and more you're just having to try to couple this together. Versus in the graph, once you put together that recipe, that workflow, or that query, it's just you get what you get.
That's such a great point, and it aligns so well with Zonos' mission. We're creating trust and we're decoding cross-border. We're simplifying things, and so what our GraphQL APIs do is we simplify this for our implementers, our developers, and our customers, because just like Clint was saying, we're managing a lot of complexity on our side with third-party REST APIs because we need to maintain some state and we need to link some things together. Whereas with Zonos, we're kind of doing that for you, so it makes the implementation much more simple. And we create these workflows. We're creating workflows for different use cases to tie everything together. And so you just make one request and then you're off to the races.
Okay. So now the big question, Andrew, I'm a customer that wants to implement Zonos, and you tell me I have to implement a GraphQL API and I've only done REST. Should I be intimidated by doing this?
No, you should not be intimidated. It's just as simple as making, you can sit down at the terminal and type curl and make the same request as you would with a REST API. It has an endpoint.
So the curl looks exactly the same.
Well, it looks very similar, yeah.
Okay. But the documentation as you read it does look different. I mean, it is different terminology here. You instead of a get, right? You have a query, right? You're going to do with GraphQL.
Yeah, so GraphQL has a concept of queries and mutations. And so unlike a REST API where you're using the HTTP verbs, so you're using, get and post and delete and those, it's just queries and mutations. So queries retrieve data, they're reading data, and mutations can make changes or it's kind of like similar to a post.
Similar to a post, right? Yeah. But we've had some examples of customers implementing the GraphQL API, and you've had some feedback on it. What has been some of the feedback so far, and what's yeah. Tell me a little bit about the experience you've had so far with implementing this out in production.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see customers adopt our GraphQL APIs, and sometimes we didn't even know about it in engineering. And so a great example would be we have a cartonization API, and it's very robust, but we don't actually even really sell this API, right? It's available in what we call our customer graph, which is our public graph, but we don't sell it. So we have a customer that understood that we had this cartonization API, and this is a customer on one of our oldest products. This is our checkout V1 product that is, when did that launch, Clint? That was probably like...
Oh, geez. Well, that was...
it's like Angular 1.
The Angular one would have been what, like 2014 or something, I want to say?
That sounds about right. So 2014. So this merchant is still on this checkout product, which is a great product. It's just, it hasn't had a lot of love lately. We have a new checkout now that is amazing.
They will be automatically upgraded, but we'll talk about how we're doing our facades and that kind of stuff in a minute, which is really relevant. But anyway, keep going. It is.
So anyway, this merchant is on one of our older products, but then they saw this new GraphQL API for cartonization, and they implemented it, no problem. In fact, they loved it. They said the API was really great, consistent, et cetera. And we didn't know about it in engineering. And then all of a sudden, we see a huge increase in API traffic to our cartonization. And we're like, what's going on? Is someone running a load test? And no, it was this merchant that had gone live. We didn't even know. And they're using our cartonization API, and they're expanding to use more of our GraphQL APIs now.
It's interesting. You talk about how that's not even a product offering per se. That's just a component of shipment rating, right? Is cartonizing products so that way you can get an accurate shipping cost. But that's kind of the beauty of going on GraphQL is it allows us to take advantage of use cases that maybe we haven't even thought of yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the decisions we made when we really became API first is I would always challenge an engineer or a product person that every API is public unless you can tell me why it's not going to be. And so something like cartonization, right? We use that internally in the checkout flow and everything else, but why would, somebody want to use that directly outside of that flow? But we designed it as such in case they did. And that's, I think, that the benefits we're getting with the graph is we have externalized so many things that are available that usually I think most companies would just leave internal.
Right. Yeah. And that was a mandate from you. And I think it was really good for us to remember as we were designing and implementing these APIs, everything should be a public API unless there's a really good reason to keep it private. And it's been a huge benefit for this merchant and for Zonos.
Now, we dog-fooded this first. So our Shopify app is fully powered by GraphQL today. It wasn't an overnight switch. But that is complete and it is finished. Aaron was in that project and it was extremely painful. However, the gains are important here, right? So talk to me a little bit about the speeds and like you already talked about the scalability with the graph, like it's federated, you can run things in parallel. There's a lot of benefits there. But how does that translate over to, the user that's getting a quote back? What are we seeing right now with the speeds in the graph and just the benefits we're getting?
Yeah, so Shopify has always had an SLA of 500 milliseconds in their checkout. So if you have any APIs that are used in checkout, which our APIs are, you have to adhere to that SLA. And Zonos has always been pretty good about adhering to that SLA. And so we've always been under the 500 milliseconds for that full workflow. However, with the new GraphQL APIs, we're around 100 milliseconds, usually at most. The biggest delays are coming from the third-party API calls that we're making to, for example, the carriers for the shipment rating. But we do some things to cache that, and we actually have a new enhancement coming soon to shipment rating, where we'll have the shipment rating latency down to well under 100 milliseconds, because we're doing some really smart estimation on shipment ratings. And this leads into one of our key products, which is, well, I should say it's part of the landed cost product. It's a guarantee that we have on the landed cost. And we're getting so good at landed cost and understanding shipment rating and all of these components that we can guarantee this and we can turn results very, very quickly. And so there are some instances with some customers where we have very, very, very stringent SLAs on the landed cost, under 20 milliseconds actually. And we're able to meet that now with the new GraphQL APIs, which is pretty remarkable.
That's insane.
Yeah, that is insane. And when you say under 20, we've been pretty far under 20 on some of these. Like it's been impressive, the speed. And okay, how about uptime, right? So how has this also changed our the downtime that we would have at with previously on REST? What's our uptime looking like?
Yeah, so it's probably important to say that REST, the REST APIs were more of a monolith type of solution where you have one database that's powering all of these 1,500 API endpoints. And what we've done with GraphQL, we have this federated GraphQL supergraph that has these subgraphs. Well, all of these subgraphs are technically microservices, and they can all scale independently. And what that has led to is we now have nearly 5 nines of uptime on our core APIs that are on GraphQL. And that's in contrast to where we were hovering around like 3.5 nines before. And there's just this fragility that we've eliminated with the new architecture. And that's really important for our customers because we're involved in one of the most critical like paths for conversion. And you have to be available for your merchants. And so we have a goal this year to achieve 5 nines. And I think we will achieve that. And next year, I think we'll be exceeding that with this new architecture. And so, for example, in our legacy systems, there are some critical components that are required for most of the responses to come back reliably. And if there's any issue with one of those services, it just brings the whole thing down. And so if you have an issue with the rules engine in this case, in the legacy system, that can put at risk any of the other API endpoints, which is really hard to maintain reliability and uptime if you have like this critical component that if it fails, then all of your services go down. And so we've eliminated those types of single points of failure in the new architecture. And it's really fun to see the reliability now. And I didn't think we'd get there this year in 2024. And we did it. And in fact, over the last 24 months, we've had nearly 5.9 uptime on 2 of our core APIs, which is pretty awesome.
Well, getting off legacy traditionally doesn't work for companies, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it can be a challenge. I think most projects fail, depending on which metric you're looking at and measuring a project by. But most projects to re-platform and re-architect aren't successful to some degree. And we've achieved a ton of success with these new APIs. We already have customers using them. And I think you mentioned the facades. We're doing really cool things. We're able to, so for example, in supply chain, the supply chain industry is a little,
you don't have to sugarcoat it. It's not a little.
How would you describe
it's archaic.
Archaic?
It's archaic. It moves slow, and adopting new technology is not their number one priority. And so, and then the other thing we run into with our customer base, just in e-commerce in general, we really are focused on a niche part of most of our customers' business. So when you look at, if you're an e-commerce retailer, the large majority of your business is domestic here in the U.S. anyways. Other parts of the world are different, but for many of our merchants that are based in the U.S., we're talking international makes up 5-10% of their business, 10% if they're lucky. Now, there's exceptions that rule both directions, but for the most part, it's a very small part of their business. And so getting resources in place to prioritize projects around international can sometimes be challenging, right? And so I think we started looking at this, and sorry if I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but when it comes to getting off legacy, we had a question posed to ourselves, like, so we're going to have to go back to all of these long-time customers and tell them, hey, here's a deadline that you have to meet to reintegrate with us on our new technology, or else we're going to turn you off. And we have a core value here where we're responsible for our customer success, and that just wasn't something we were willing to do. So that's where we had to come up with some creative ways to kill the legacy code, let's say, but also not be very disruptive to our customers or disruptive at all. And in fact, I think we are finding ways to give advantages to our existing customers without them having to lift a finger.
That's right. One thing that is one huge benefit that I see in GraphQL is that we can derive REST APIs from the GraphQL schema. Because it's so well designed, it's pretty straightforward to derive REST APIs from that. And we've done that as needed for some customers. But then there's this great benefit. We have existing REST APIs. Why couldn't they just be powered by our graph? And in fact, it's pretty straightforward. And so we've built these facades for the legacy APIs, and we have all these customers that have integrated our legacy APIs, like you were mentioning, Aaron, and we're now able to pretty easily create a facade for that legacy API and then move the customer onto the graph. So they're now on the very reliable, scalable, performant GraphQL technology, but they haven't had to lift a finger, change a thing. They don't even know a lot of times that this has happened.
Except maybe the response times got a little quicker, right?
Things get faster. And now, Clint, you talked about this as we were driving in. Like now they have this benefit in our dashboard where there's this additional information that they're getting from the graph that they have a benefit with no change to their implementation. Now down the road, there may be some features that they want that don't exist in that legacy API. And at that point, they can integrate those features, kind of like this other merchant we were talking about with cartonization, but they're not forced to.
Yeah, they're getting speed improvements. They're getting more detail, right? And for troubleshooting, they can just log into our dashboard and see all the detail behind it, detail that they couldn't see before. And just overnight, they're able to log in and start seeing all of this. And so, yeah, I mean, all of those benefits, and this isn't for a small percentage of merchants. I mean, Aaron, who has been lucky enough to spearhead most of the project with transitioning customers, what percentage of our thousands of customers have been moved over to be powered by the graph, either by a facade or directly with an integration like in Shopify or whatever else? What's your?
I'd have to do. I'm not sure how many nines we're on, but we're
nearing 100%. So as we talk about GraphQL and this new thing, I think it's really important for people that are listening to understand that this isn't just a new thing we're excited about, that we're, we have this new performance improvements. It's like, no, basically every one of our customers is getting powered by this, including, large customers. Like USPS is a massive customer of ours, needed a REST API, right? So, that was it needed, but they're getting the benefits of the graph. And I think that's the important thing, is that there are, like Aaron said, we're responsible for their success. And we have been so mindful at how we go about transitioning our customers. You were talking about the old checkout. I mean, we're going to be able to give all of our customers the brand new updated checkout without them having to lift a finger. And that's, I think a key part of our success is our attention to our customers and making sure that they continue to get benefits of getting more orders, more customers, without having to, as much as possible, whenever possible, make a change on their end.
Yep. And that comes back to your original question. Why was Zonos successful in this re-platform when a lot of these types of initiatives fail? It's because we were focused on the customer. We are responsible for the customer success. And so we challenged ourselves, how do we do this? How do we make this transition without disrupting their businesses and without relying on them to re-implement, reintegrate, that's a big ask. And so because we started with that goal in mind, I think we were able to be really successful.
I love it.
Totally agree.
Yep. Yeah. And now I think there is definitely valid reasons for customers that may be on an older technology to integrate directly with the graph. But as we talk through it, I know, the graph to me just sounds like a choose your own adventure kind of API, right? Which I'd say is pretty accurate. But sometimes that can feel overwhelming when there's a lot of potential adventures that you could go on with this GraphQL. How do you make it simple for a customer to, because if I go to the REST APIs, they're very prescriptive, right? It's like, here you go. This is what you get. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit. That's what I tell my kids at dinner time. But GraphQL is not quite like that. But at the same time, there's some simplicity and in those comfortable restraints of REST APIs that people get comfortable with. They just say, hey, this is what I got to work with, and I'm going to figure out a way to work with it. But GraphQL, the flexibility is great, but can also be a little overwhelming at times. How do you simplify it for a customer?
That's a great question. I think there are two ways to do that. One is through your user guides. And so documentation is really important. And that's important for REST API as well, or any API. Good documentation is key to frictionless implementation. And so that's a focus for Zonos. We document first before we build, and we document the use cases. Those are the most important thing to think about as we're focused on the customer. And then we've also done something, we kind of have adopted this benefit you get from REST of being prescriptive into our GraphQL APIs, and we call these workflows. And so you can have a mutation that creates a landed cost, and it's totally separate from anything else in the graph, and it can be utilized for whatever you need that for. And we have customers that do that. However, if you're in e-commerce, then you probably don't just need a landed cost. You probably need a little bit more. And in that case, we have an e-commerce workflow. And this is exactly how we were able to solve this challenge that Clint alluded to earlier with, okay, we have this new REST API, and now we can't integrate it with shipment rating for Shopify, one of our, most important customer bases. I mean, we have a lot of merchants on Shopify. And so how do we solve for that? So we created a workflow, and you could call this an e-commerce type of workflow. We call it the landed cost workflow, but it essentially has all of the components that you would need for landed cost. And it's a little prescriptive, even though it's still a GraphQL mutation. And that allowed us to then transition every single Shopify merchant onto GraphQL with this workflow. So they're all using the same workflow.
So it can be prescriptive when you need it to be, as long as it's documented well.
Precisely. And so we gain this huge flexibility. So we have the benefit of the graph, but then if we see the benefit of, some of the great things inherent in a REST API, we can bring that into the graph, and we have done that.
So if someone starts with something simple and says, hey, I just want this very specific use case, you can give them very basic, simple instructions on how to get, let's say, a landed cost. And then if they want to add features down the road, how easy is that?
It's very easy, because as we were designing this, we were looking at all of these objects that we needed to relate together, and we wanted them to be loosely coupled, but they had to have these relationships. And we were thinking about how the graph solves that in a great way. And so GraphQL is essentially a acyclic directed graph. And so you have an entry point, which is typically like a root node. And then from that node, you can get all of this information, this rich information related to like cross-border transactions, right? And as we were designing APIs, we knew we had to tie all of this together in some fashion. And the solution was really clear. We need to have kind of a root node that helps all of our federated services connect in a very easy fashion. So you can enter the graph, let's say with a landed cost, but then if you need to expand that into completing an order or adding shipment ratings or restricting items in a catalog or even adding a catalog and then classifying that catalog, all of that ties together really simply, and you can build from just that initial implementation of a landed cost, which with our legacy REST APIs, that was difficult to impossible to do.
And so that I assume this also means that as Zonos adds new functionality and new features in the future, those immediately become available to someone to tie into with that same endpoint.
That's correct. Yeah, we just publish a new customer graph or public graph, and then it has all of that new functionality.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've been excited about this for years, and so I think this has been a really good podcast to discuss. And though very detailed, I think this podcast can be useful for obviously our customers that are trying to understand why we've used the graph and the benefits of using it, including internally, right? Positioning this and the benefits to our customers. But also, I think anyone that's on that journey of going from having legacy tech debt and moving to getting off of legacy, I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here. And you've done a great job at working with the team and a lot of personalities and opinions and smart people and coming together to create just an incredible solution for all of our customers and all of our plugins out there. And the future is bright for us because we've spent the last 2 to 3 years really trying to get off of legacy. Not a lot of new features, but I'll tell you what, our feature now, like acceleration, has been insane because we made this decision. And so the speed at which we're developing is probably, what would you say, Andrew? How much faster are we developing now and releasing products than we were just 3 years back?
Yeah, what was it? 2023, it was well over 50 features that released.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, we're still maintaining legacy. And so we have our resources, our time is kind of spent maintaining legacy, transitioning off of legacy. So our velocity already has increased, even though we have this situation where we're maintaining both systems. Once we're like 100% off legacy, yeah.
And we're almost at 100%. We're like so close.
Yeah, it's
a big push right now. So that that will happen this year. That's for sure. But
for
yes,
sure. We're almost at escape velocity. And then watch out. Once we hit that, and that's coming soon. So really exciting to see the velocity that's happening. All of these new features, seeing customers use them. It's really rewarding for an engineer to see their work out in the field getting used. So that's one of the things that motivates us most. And yeah, so the future is very, very bright.
Well, thanks for taking the time to come on and talk about the journey at Zonos with our APIs and GraphQL. It's been a pleasure. We appreciate it, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.